found the evening two visitors who visited me in Besançon. On the evening of June 27, General Ritter von Eppey, commander of the 19th Infantry Regiment, who was passing through Besançon looking for his regiment, arrived. I knew this general from a joint hunting trip in Spectewald. We had a long and extensive conversation about the armistice with France and the continuance of the war against England. This conversation gave me particular pleasure, as the isolated position in which I was placed prevented me from forming an opinion. The second visitor, with whom I discussed the same subject on July 5, was the Reai Minister of Armament and Military Industry, Dr. Tot, who had come to see me in order to use the recent experience of combat operations in the interests of the further development of tank construction. I did not like the armistice just concluded to the jubilation of the German people and to Hitler's satisfaction. After the complete victory of German arms won over France, we could have concluded another peace treaty. We could have demanded the complete disarmament of France, the complete occupation of the country, the abandonment of the war fleet and the colonies. But it was also possible to go the other way, the way of understanding, to propose to the French to preserve the integrity of their country, their colonies and their national independence for the sake of a quick peace also with England. Between these two extremes there could have been various options. Whatever decision was taken, but if taken it was to create favourable prerequisites for the German Reich to quickly end the war not only against France but against Britain. To end the war with Britain, it was necessary first of all to seek diplomatic negotiations more confidently. Hitler's proposal from the rostrum of the Reichstag could not be considered a diplomatic step. It is now clear to me that it is unlikely that England would have entered into negotiations with Hitler at that time. Nevertheless, an attempt should have been made to start negotiations, if only to avoid reproaching ourselves later for refusing to use peaceful means to resolve the conflict. But if diplomatic steps did not produce the desired results, military means should have been used immediately and with all their might. Of course, Hitler and his staff thought of continuing the war against Britain. This is evidenced by the operation known as Sea Lion, which involved landing on the British Isles. Given our lack of preparation for warfare at sea and in the air, which prevented us from landing on the British Isles, it was necessary, in addition, to find other solutions that would allow us to deal a sensitive blow to the maritime power and force it to negotiate. At that time, the most effective way to quickly establish peace I saw in the most immediate continuation of our offensive towards the mouth of the Rhone, so that after mastering the French ports in the Mediterranean Sea in cooperation with the Italians to land airborne landing in Africa and on the island of Malta. If the French join us, so much the better. If not, we and the Italians must alone continue the war and without delay. It is known how weak the British were then in Egypt. Large Italian forces were still in Abyssinia. The air defence of Malta was weak. It seemed to me that everything spoke in favour of continuing our operations in this direction. All in favour, nothing against. It was necessary to quickly transfer 4 to 6 armoured divisions in Africa and create there an overwhelming superiority in force before the British had time to move reinforcements. The results of a German-Italian landing in North Africa in 1940 would have been much more favourable for us than in 1941, after the first defeat of the Italians. It is quite possible that the distrust Hitler felt toward the Italians kept him from moving the war to Africa. But it is even more likely that Hitler, being a prisoner of purely continental views, did not realize the decisive importance of the Mediterranean area for the British. Be that as it may, I heard nothing more about my proposals, and only in 1950. I learned that General Ritter von Eppey nevertheless found it possible to communicate them to Hitler. According to the report of Captain First Rank Wenig, who accompanied Epp, Hitler refused to speak on the substance of these proposals. Staying in Besançon gave me an opportunity to familiarize myself with the Jura Mountains, and on July 1 from Montrond to see the Lake Geneva, which I knew well. I then visited Lyons to see my eldest son there, who had been wounded a second time during the Western Campaign and had received an extraordinary rank for bravery. Correct relations were established with the prefect and with the burgomaster of Besançon. Both were characterized by extreme politeness. In early July, the tank group was disbanded. Some divisions were sent to Germany, others in the Paris area. The headquarters of the tank group also arrived in the Paris area. We were supposed to prepare for a big parade in honor of the Führer, but fortunately it did not take place. While in Paris, I visited Versailles and Fontainebleau, a magnificent old castle with beautiful historical monuments. With particular interest, I inspected the Napoleon Museum at Malmaison. The old, dignified director did me the courtesy of accompanying me on a tour of the museum. The explanations given by this great expert in the history of the Great Corsican were very instructive and interesting to me. It goes without saying that I took in all the sights of Paris as far as was possible, down to the conditions of the war. At first I lived at the Hotel Lancaster, then I moved to a private apartment in the Bois de Boulogne. My stay in Paris was interrupted by a meeting of the Reichstag on July 19, to which I was ordered to arrive with many other generals. At the meeting, Hitler's order was read to award me the rank of Colonel General. Since the parade was cancelled, there was no reason for a prolonged stay of the headquarters of the tank group in Paris. Therefore, in early August, we were transferred to Berlin, where we were given the opportunity to rest. Meanwhile, the units that remained in France were preparing for the implementation of the Plan C Lyon, which, however, already from the beginning were not taken seriously enough. This plan, in my opinion, was completely unpromising due to the lack of sufficient aircraft. The necessary naval tonnage and the evacuation of the British Expeditionary Corps from Dunkirk. The two reasons given first are the best proof that Germany had no intention of waging war with the Western powers and was not secretly preparing for it. When the full storms began in September, the Sea Lion plan was finally buried. The preparation of tank forces for Operation Sea Lion made it possible to test underwater tanks of the TII and TID types. By August 10, these vehicles were already in combat readiness at the tank site in Putlos. In 1941, they were used in Russia during the crossing of the Western Bug River. Based on the experience of the Western campaign, Hitler demanded to bring the production of tanks to 801,000 vehicles per month. Calculations of the Armament Department of the Land Forces showed that for this purpose it would be necessary to spend 2 billion marks and use up to 100,000 skilled workers and specialists. Due to such enormous costs, Hitler unfortunately had to abandon his intention. Hitler further demanded that the TIE tank be armed with the 50 L60 gun instead of the previous 37 gun. However, the tank was fitted with the 50 ME gun L42 with a shorter barrel. In all likelihood, Hitler did not immediately recognize why the Armament Department had decided to change the type of gun. When he noticed in February 1941 that his instructions had not been carried out, even though the technical possibilities allowed it, he was very angry and could never forgive this arbitrariness of the department heads. A few years later he recalled it. After the campaign, Hitler had at his disposal a much larger number of tank and motorized divisions. The number of tank divisions in a short time doubled, but the number of tank units included in the division was also halved. Thanks to these measures, the German ground forces nominally had twice as many tank divisions, but their striking power, which should have been taken care of in the first place, did not increase. At the same time, the doubling of the number of motorized divisions caused such a severe strain on our automobile industry that Hitler's demands could be met only at the cost of using all available stocks of motor vehicles, including war trophies. The trophy material was slightly inferior to German material. In particular, it did not meet the increased demands placed on motor vehicles in the Eastern and African theatres of war. I was assigned to oversee the formation and combat training of several tank and motorized divisions. I had more than enough work to do. In my rare leisure hours, I racked my brains over the problem of the further continuation of the war, which, one way or another, but must end some day. My thoughts went southward. I maintained the view I had expressed at Besançon, that the end of the war against Great Britain was the most important, and even the only important issue. I had no contact with the General Command of Land Forces and with the General Staff, so I did not participate in the discussion of the reorganization of armoured forces and the problem of the further conduct of the war. In October 1940, Hitler was busy negotiating with the French and Franco on the continuation of the war. At the end of the negotiations, he met in Florence with his friend Mussolini. On his way to Florence at Bologna station, Hitler suddenly learned that his ally, without notifying him, Hitler, and even without his consent, had started a war with Greece. By doing so, the Balkan problem was again affected, and the war went in a direction extremely undesirable for Germany. The first consequence of Mussolini's arbitrary step was, as Hitler told me, Franco's refusal to take any action together with the Axis. He clearly did not want to pursue a joint policy with such partners from whom all sorts of surprises could be expected. The second consequence was the increasing tension between Germany and the Soviet Union. This tension was heightened by a number of incidents of recent months, and especially by German policy in Romania and on the Danube. In order to eliminate this tension, Molotov was invited to Berlin. From Molotov's visit and the course of the negotiations, Hitler concluded that war with the Soviet Union could not be avoided. He repeatedly drew me the course of the Berlin negotiations in exactly the form in which I passed them on above. It is true that he spoke to me for the first time on this subject in 1943, but thereafter he repeatedly told me the same thing, invariably giving the negotiations the same assessment. I doubt whether he was accurately conveying the view he held at the time. On Italian policy in October 1940, Hitler spoke with even more indignation than on Russian claims, and I think he was quite right in his view. The Italian attack on Greece was not only frivolous, but altogether unnecessary. Already on October 30, the Italian offensive was halted, and on November B, the Greeks seized the initiative. When bad policy leads to military disaster, it is usually blamed on the generals. So with the Italians, Mussolini's anger was directed at the generals, especially Badoglio, who warned Mussolini against military adventures, but unfortunately in vain. In mid-November, the Greeks dealt the Italians sensitive blows. Badoglio was now declared an enemy of the existing regime in Italy and a traitor. On November 26, he resigned. On December 6, his post was taken over by Cavallero. December 10, the Italians suffered a heavy defeat in Africa at Sidi Barrani. In the common interest of Germany and Italy, it would have been more expedient if the Italians had abandoned the adventure in Greece and instead strengthened their position in Africa. Now Marshal Graziani of Africa began to ask for German airplanes to be sent to him. Mussolini began to beg for a couple of German panzer divisions for Libya. German troops under Rommel again restored the position. As a result of the Italians' AWOL actions and mistakes in the Balkans, large German forces were constrained in Africa, and then in Bulgaria, Greece and Yugoslavia. This circumstance reduced the number of our troops in the decisive theatre of operations. It turned out that for the conduct of the war is still not enough to declare the Alpine Ridge border of interests between the Axis powers. Interaction between the Allies was unacceptably poorly organized. Shortly after Molotov's visit to Berlin, my Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel Baron von Liebenstein, and the Chief of Operations, Major Bielaine, was summoned to the Chief of the General Staff of the Land Forces for a meeting, where they received the first instructions on the Barbarossa Plan, the plan of war against Russia. When they came to report to me after this meeting and unfolded before me a map of Russia, I could not believe my eyes. What I thought was impossible was to be realized: Hitler, who sharply criticized in my presence the political leadership of Germany in 1914, who did not understand the dangers of waging war on two fronts, now himself wanted, without ending the war with England, to start a war with Russia. By this he was himself bringing upon himself the danger arising from waging war on two fronts, against which all the old soldiers had strongly warned him, in which he himself had come to call an erroneous step. I expressed my disappointment and indignation very unequivocally, striking both my fellow soldiers. They were under the impression of the plan of the General Command of the Land Forces, and therefore immediately replied to me that, according to the Chief of the General Staff of the Land Forces, Gotha, to defeat Russia will require no more than 8 to 10 weeks. The division of forces between three roughly equal groups of armies, which must move in diverging directions deep into the territory of Russia, without a clear operational goal, from the point of view of a military expert, could not seem right. I communicated my concerns through my Chief of Staff to the General Command of the Land Forces, which, however, had no effect. Not being privy to all matters, I could still hope that Hitler had not finally decided to go to war with the Soviet Union, but only wanted to intimidate him. Still, the winter and spring of 1941 were a nightmare for me. A new study of the campaigns of King Charles XI of Sweden and Napoleon I showed all the difficulties of this theatre of war. At the same time, the insufficiency of our preparation for such a major campaign was revealed. Past successes, especially the victory in the West, won in such an unexpectedly short period of time, so clouded the brains of the leaders of our high command that they erased the word impossible from their vocabulary. All the leaders of the Supreme Command of the Armed Forces and the General Command of the Land Forces, with whom I had to speak, showed unwavering optimism and did not respond to any objections. In preparation for the difficult tasks ahead, I was particularly zealous in training and arming the divisions under my control. I persistently pointed out to the troops that the coming campaign would be much heavier than the Polish and Western campaigns. In order to preserve military secrecy, I could not say anything else. I only wanted to prevent my soldiers from taking lightly the new, terribly difficult task. Unfortunately, as already mentioned above, the material part of the newly formed divisions on Hitler's orders were mainly French vehicles. This material part in no way met the requirements of the war in Eastern Europe. Insufficient production of vehicles in Germany, not meeting the rapidly growing needs, unfortunately did not allow us to cover this deficit. About the reduction in the number of tank units in the division I have already mentioned. The reduction in the number of tanks in the division was to some extent compensated for by arming the division with tanks of the new types TIT and TIV, which almost completely replaced the old tanks of types TI and TIE. By the beginning of the war against Russia, we thought that we could count on the technical superiority of our tanks over the types of Russian tanks known to us at that time, which could to some extent reduce the significant numerical superiority of the Russians known to us. However, I was already aware of one circumstance. Just in the spring of 1941, Hitler allowed the Russian Military Commission to inspect our tank schools and tank factories, ordering to show everything to the Russians. At the same time, the Russians inspecting our TIV-type tank did not want to believe that it was our heaviest tank. They repeatedly claimed that we were hiding from them our newest designs, which Hitler had promised to show them. The insistence of the Commission was so great that our fabricators and armament department officers concluded. It seems that the Russians themselves already possess heavier and more advanced types of tanks than we do. Appeared at the end of July 1941 in front of our front tank T-34 and was a type of tank of the latest design. April 18, Hitler, during the inspection of the material part of the tank divisions, which I was not present, noticed that the armament department of the ground forces did not comply with his orders and armed the tank type TE instead of 50M gun L60 50M gun L42. This arbitrariness particularly angered Hitler, because the department did not fulfill his personal demand. The firm Alket in Spandau had fulfilled this wish of his by the end of April, but the Armament Directorate was in an extremely awkward position. Later, Hitler invariably pointed out this mistake, if anyone approvingly commented on the work of the Armament Department of the Land Forces. By that time, however, the annual production of tanks in Germany had reached at least 1,000 vehicles of all types. Compared to the number of tanks produced by our enemy, this was a very small figure. Back in 1933, I knew that the only Russian tank factory was producing 22 vehicles of the Christie Russian type per day. On March 1, Bulgaria joined the Pact of Three, and on March 25, Yugoslavia followed suit. However, on March 27, a coup d'état in Belgrade overturned the plans of the Axis powers. April 5, Russia and Yugoslavia concluded a treaty of friendship. In April 6, the Balkan campaign began. I did not participate in it. The tank units sent to the Balkans again justified the hopes of the command and contributed to the rapid end of the campaign. Only one man rejoiced at the expansion of the war, Mussolini. It was his war, which he had unleashed against Hitler's will, but the treaty of friendship concluded between Russia and Yugoslavia made one thing clear. The moment had come to break with the strong eastern neighbour. On April 13, Belgrade fell. On April 17, the Yugoslav army capitulated, and on April 23, despite help from the British, the Greek army capitulated. At the end of May, airborne troops took possession of the island of Crete. Unfortunately not Malta, Germany, Italy, Hungary. Bulgaria and Albania gained chunks of Yugoslavia's territory. From the remainder, an independent Croatian state was formed. Duke von Spoleto, an Italian prince, was to be its head. However, he did not get the throne. In addition, Montenegro was also declared an independent state at the wish of the Italian king. The borders of the new Croatia did not correspond to the national boundaries, so from the beginning there was friction with Italy. Hostile differences increasingly poisoned the atmosphere in this troubled corner of Europe. In May and June 1941, the British succeeded in occupying Syria and Abyssinia. The German attempt to gain a foothold in Iraq was made with insufficient means and therefore failed. It would have had prospects for success only with a consistent policy in the Mediterranean, the opportunity for which was presented to us in the summer of 1940, immediately after the Western campaign. It was now too late to decide on this isolated action, although the Balkan campaign had developed comparatively rapidly, and the transfer of troops who had taken part in that campaign and were now destined for the campaign in Russia had also proceeded at a rapid pace. The beginning of our offensive against Russia had to be postponed. Besides, the spring of 1941 was unusually stormy in Poland. The Western Bug River and its tributaries overflowed, and the floods did not subside until May. The meadows became swampy and difficult to pass through. I was convinced of this when I inspected my troops stationed in Poland. 3 groups of armies were created to attack the Soviet Union. My group south, commanded by Field Marshal von Rundstedt, which was to advance south of the Pripyat marshes. Army Group Center under the command of Field Marshal von Bock, which was to advance between the Pripyat marshes and Suwalki. Army Group North under the command of Field Marshal Ritter von Lieb, which was concentrating in East Prussia. These 3 groups of armies were to advance on the territory of Russia with the task of breaking through the defences of Russian troops located near the border, surround them and destroy them. Tank groups were to penetrate deep into Russian territory to prevent the creation of new defences. The direction of the main strike was not determined. 3 groups of armies had about the same forces, although Army Group Centre included 2 tank groups and Army Group South and North only 1 each, subordinate to me. The 2nd Tank Group, as well as acting to the north of the 3rd Tank Group of Colonel General Gotha, was part of Army Group Centre. The organisation of the 2nd Tank Group was as follows. Mechternzer, Colonel General Guderian, Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel Baron von Liebenstein. No, 24th Panzer Corps, General of Tank Forces Baron Geyer von Schweppenberg. 3rd Armoured Division, Lieutenant General Model. 4th Armoured Division, Major General von Langemann and Erlingkamp. 10th Motorized Division, Major General von Lepper. 1st Cavalry Division, Lieutenant General Felt. 46th Armoured Corps, General of Armoured Forces Baron von Fittinghoff. 10th Panzer Division, Lieutenant General Schauel. SS Motorized Division Reich, Lieutenant General Hauser. Infantry Regiment Greater Germany, Major General von Stockhausen. 7th Panzer Corps, General of Tank Forces Limelsen. 17th Armoured Division, Major General von Arnim. 18th Armoured Division, Major General Neering. 29th Motorized Division, Major General von Boltenstern. Short rendition, the tank group included army units. Short-range bomber aviation group of General Fiebig, anti-aircraft artillery regiment Hermann Göring General von Axthelm. Artillery was headed by General Heimanen, engineering troops, General Becher, communication troops, Colonel Praun, reconnaissance aviation, Lieutenant Colonel von Zevish. The area of the offensive of the tank group in the first weeks of fighting covered the fighters of Colonel Melder. On the first day of the offensive to force the river, Zap, bug on both sides of Brest-Litovsk, break through the Russian front and then, quickly using the initial success, go to the area of Roslaval, Yelnya, Smolensk. At the same time, it was necessary to prevent the enemy to gain a foothold and create a new defence front, thus providing the prerequisites for the decisive success of the campaign in 1941. Upon completion of its task, the tank group was to receive new instructions from the command. The strategic deployment directive of the General Command of the Land Forces indicated that the next task of the 2nd and 3rd Tank Groups would be an offensive in a northward direction and the capture of Leningrad. The border between the Polish Governor-General's office, subordinate to the German authorities, and the Soviet territory ran along the Western Bug, with the fortress city of Brest-Litovsk divided into 2 parts so that the fortress itself belonged to Russia. Only the old forts located west of the Western Bug belonged to us. Already during the Polish campaign I had to take this fortress, and here I was again to fulfill this task, although in much more difficult conditions. The High Command, despite the experience of the Western campaign, did not have a unified opinion on the use of tank formations. This was reflected during the various exercises that were organized to clarify the upcoming task and prepare commanders for its implementation. Generals who had nothing to do with tank forces were of the opinion that the first strike should be infantry divisions, having previously conducted a strong artillery preparation and the tanks should be introduced into the battle only after the depression reaches a certain depth and the possibility of a breakthrough. On the contrary, tank generals attached great importance to the use of tanks from the very beginning in the first echelon, because it was in this kind of troops they saw the striking force of the offensive. They believed that tanks could quickly make a deep penetration and then immediately build on the initial success by utilizing their speed. The generals saw for themselves the results of using tanks in the second echelon in France. At the moment of success, the roads were jammed with endless, slow-moving columns of infantry divisions that impeded the movement of the tanks. Weidenau's tankers resolved the issue as follows. In the breakthrough areas to use tanks in the first echelon, ahead of the infantry, and where other tasks were solved, for example, the capture of a fortress, to use infantry divisions. This was the case in the area of the second tank group offensive. The fortress Brest-Litovsk with its old fortifications, separated from us by the rivers Zap, Bug and Mukavek, as well as numerous ditches filled with water, could be taken only by infantry. Tanks could take it only by a surprise attack, which we tried to do in 1939. But in 1941 there were no more conditions for that. Therefore I decided to force the western Bug on both sides of Brest-Litovsk with tank divisions, and for the attack on the fortress I asked to subordinate to me an infantry corps. This corps was to be taken from the Fourth Army, following the tank group. The Fourth Army was also to temporarily give me to ensure the forcing of the river Zap, Bug several infantry and above all artillery units. In order to achieve centralized control, I asked to temporarily subordinate these units to me, declaring for my part that I was ready to be subordinated to the commander of the Fourth Army Field Marshal von Kluge for the same period of time. This order of subordination was accepted by the army group. For me it was a sacrifice, as Field Marshal von Kluge was an unpleasant superior, but I considered it necessary in the interests of the cause. The terrain through which the offensive was to take place was bounded from the front by the western Bug. Our first task was to force the river in front of the enemy. The success of the forcing could be greatly facilitated by the suddenness of the operation. I did not count on the immediate fall of the fortress Brest-Litovsk, and had to make sure that the initial division of tank corps, forced to move on both sides of the fortress, did not affect the course of the offensive. In addition, it was necessary to ensure both open flanks of the tank group. After forcing the western Bug, the tank group had to advance, having on the right roadless difficult-to-pass area of the Pripyat marshes, through which the small infantry forces of the Fourth Army had to advance. On the left of the tank group were advancing units of the Fourth Army, then the infantry of the Ninth Army. This left flank was threatened with the greatest danger, because in the area of Bialystok, according to the received information, there was a strong grouping of Russians. It was to be assumed that this grouping, having learned about the danger that would be created by the exit to its rear of our tanks, would try to avoid encirclement, moving along the highway Volkovysk-Slonim. I wanted to prevent this double threat to the flanks by two measures. No. Deep echelon of forces on the most threatened flank. The use of the 1st Cavalry Division, which was part of the tank group, on the right flank, 265th Infantry Division, advancing from Wolodawa to Malorita. 1st Cavalry Division, advancing from Slavataiki through Malorita to Pinsk. 4th Armoured Division, advancing from Kodani with the task to cut the highway Brest. 3rd Armoured Division, advancing from the area north of Kodani with the task to cut the highway Brest. 10th Motorized Division moves behind them in the second echelon. The 12th Army Corps, subordinated to the group for the first days of the offensive, advances with the 45th and 31st Infantry Divisions from the area north of Kodani, Dnieper with the task of encircling Brest-Litovsk. The rest of the forces, which will not participate in the encirclement of Brest-Litovsk, advances between the roads Brest-Litovsk, Kobrin, Bereza, Kartuzskaya and Mutikali, Filichet, Prushany, Slonim with the task to clear the area between the 24th Tank Corps and its neighbour on the left, the 47th Tank Corps, and to provide the inner flanks of both Tank Corps. Left flank, 47th Tank Corps. 18th and 17th Armoured Divisions, advancing between Lehigh and Prachulin across the Zap, Bug and Lesna rivers to Vaidom El, Pruzhani, Slonim. 29th Motorized Division follows them in the second echelon. 167th Infantry Division advances west of Prachulin. Tank Group Reserve. The 46th Panzer Corps, consisting of the 10th Panzer Division, the SS Reich Division, and the Greater Germany Infantry Regiment, concentrates in the area of Radzin, Lukow, Demblin, and beyond, as the first echelon troops force the Bug, follows on the left flank of the tank group behind the 47th Tank Corps. June 6. The Chief of the General Staff of the Army arrived at the headquarters of the tank group. Here he expressed his opinion that the task of tanks is to strike deep into the enemy's defences. To accomplish this task, tank divisions should be kept intact, and for the first throw to use infantry divisions. For the reasons I've already mentioned, I refused to change my orders. To my headquarters reached only rumours about the operational plans of the High Command after the first tasks of the offensive. According to these rumours, it was supposed to first seize Leningrad and the coast of the Baltic Sea, to establish communication with the Finns and ensure maritime communications of Army Group North. Such plans apparently were indeed made. This is confirmed by the directive on the strategic deployment of troops. It says that the 3rd Tank Group of Colonel General Gotha, and under a favourable set of circumstances. Also, my tank group on doing the Smolensk area should be ready to change the direction of the offensive and support the operations of Army Group North. This operation would give us a great advantage, providing once and for all the left flank of all German troops in Russia. I think this would have been the best plan of all possible plans, but unfortunately I never heard of it again. On June 14, Hitler gathered all the commanders of army groups, armies and tank groups in Berlin to justify his decision to attack Russia and to hear reports on the completion of preparations. He said that he could not defeat England, therefore to come to peace, he must achieve a victorious end to the war on the mainland. To create for himself an invulnerable position on the European mainland, Russia must be defeated. His detailed reasons for forcing him into a preventive war with Russia were unconvincing. The reference to the aggravation of the international situation by the German conquest of the Balkans, to Russian interference in the affairs of Finland, to the Russian occupation of the Baltic frontier states, could justify so responsible a decision as little as the ideological foundations of the National Socialist doctrine, and some information about the military preparations of the Russians could not justify it. Since the war in the West was not over, each new military campaign could lead to two-front warfare, of which Hitler's Germany was even less capable than the Germany of 1914. The generals present at the meeting listened silently to Hitler's speech, and since no discussion of the speech was intended, silently dispersed in serious thought. In the middle of the day, when the reports on readiness for combat operations, I was asked only one thing: how many days I need to reach Minsk. I answered, 5-6 days. Our offensive began on June 22, and on June 27 I had already reached Minsk, while Goth, advancing from the town of Suwalki, approaching Minsk from the north, captured it already on June 26. Before I begin to describe the combat actions of my tank group, it is necessary to briefly dwell on the general situation of the German army to the beginning of a decisive battle with Russia. According to documentary data, which I had, 205 German divisions on June 22, 1941, were distributed as follows. 38 divisions were in the west, 12 divisions in Norway, 1 division in Denmark, 7 divisions were in the Balkans, 2 divisions in Libya. 145 divisions could be used for the Eastern Campaign. This distribution of forces indicated unnecessary. 38 divisions in the west was too many for the area. Also 12 divisions was plenty for Norway. The Balkan campaign had caused the transfer of troops to the east to start late. But even more fatal was the underestimation of enemy forces. Hitler did not believe either the reports on the military power of a huge state, presented by military authorities, especially our exemplary military attaché in Moscow, General Kestring, or reports on the strength of industry and the strength of the state system of Russia. But he was able to convey his unwarranted optimism to his immediate military entourage. The High Command of the Armed Forces and the General Command of the Land Forces were so confident that they expected to finish the campaign by the beginning of winter that only 1 in 5 soldiers in the land forces was provided with winter uniforms. It was not until August 13, 1941, that the General Command of the Land Forces seriously considered the question of supplying winter uniforms to large formations of land forces. On that day, the following entry appeared in the diary. Due to changes in the situation, there is a need to conduct local operations with limited objectives, also in winter conditions. Operational Directorate to develop a plan and estimate of supplying troops with the necessary winter clothing, and after approval by the Chief of General Staff of the Land Forces to entrust the Organizational Department to carry out the necessary measures. I cannot agree with the widespread opinion that Hitler alone is to blame for the lack of winter uniforms in the fall of 1941. The Air Force and SS troops were supplied with it in time and in sufficient quantities. But the High Command thought to break the military power of Russia within 8–10 weeks, causing its political collapse. It was so sure of the success of its mad scheme that the most important branches of the military industry were already switched to the production of other products in the fall of 1941. They even thought of withdrawing 60–80 divisions from Russia at the beginning of winter, thinking that the remaining divisions would be enough to crush Russia during the winter. These divisions remaining in the east, after the end of hostilities in the fall, were supposed to be placed for the winter in well-equipped premises on some line of strongholds. It seemed that everything was settled and everything was very simple. Any doubts were met with optimistic assertions. The description of further events will show how far these designs did not correspond to the harsh reality. In conclusion, another circumstance should be mentioned, which subsequently had a most pernicious effect on the prestige of Germany. Shortly before the outbreak of war in the East, an order of the High Command of the Armed Forces concerning the treatment of civilians and prisoners of war was received directly by the corps and divisions. This order abolished the mandatory application of military penals to soldiers guilty of robbery, murder, and violence against civilians and prisoners of war, and left the imposition of punishment to the discretion of immediate superiors and commanders. Such an order could only contribute to the breakdown of discipline. Apparently, the same feeling was evidently evoked by the Commander-in-Chief of the Land Forces, for Field Marshal von Brauchitsch attached to the order an instruction allowing the order to be withheld if it posed a danger of undermining discipline. In my opinion, and in the unanimous opinion of my corps commanders, the order created such a danger in advance, so I forbade its distribution to the divisions and ordered it to be sent back to Berlin. This order, which was later destined to play a prominent role in the trials of German generals, conducted by our former adversaries, was never used in my tank group. In due course, I reported to the commander of the army group about the non-implementation of this order. Another order, also infamous, the so-called Order on Commissars, never reached my tank group at all. In all probability, it was delayed at the headquarters of Army Group Center. Thus, the Commissar order was not applied to my troops either. Viewing the past, one can only regret with pain in the heart that both of these orders were not delayed already in the general command of the land forces. Then many brave and blameless soldiers would not have had to experience the bitterness of the greatest shame that fell on the Germans. Whether the Russians had acceded to the Hague Agreement on the conduct of war on land or not, whether they had recognized the Geneva Convention or not, the Germans had to conform their mode of action to these international treaties and to the laws of their Christian faith. The war, even without these strict orders, laid a heavy enough burden on the shoulders of the population of the enemy's country, which, like the population of our country, was not guilty of it. In outlining the subsequent events of my life, I wanted to show what kind of moral and physical burden had to be borne by the commander of the tank group in the campaign against Russia. After Hitler's meeting with the generals, held on June 14 in Berlin, June 15, 1941, I left by plane for Warsaw, where my headquarters was located. All the time until June 22, the day of the beginning of the offensive, was spent in the inspection of units and initial positions for the offensive, in visiting neighbours, with whom agreed on issues of interaction. Deployment of troops and occupation of initial positions for the offensive went well. On June 17, I conducted a reconnaissance of the Zap, Bug River, along the bank of which was our front line. June 19, I visited the 3rd Army Corps of General von Mackensen, which was on the right of my tank group. June 20 and 21 was in the front lines of my corps, checking their readiness for the offensive. Careful observation of the Russians convinced me that they suspect nothing of our intentions. In the courtyard of the fortress of Brest, which was visible from our observation posts, to the sound of an orchestra they were conducting the raising of the guard. The coast fortifications along the western Bug were not occupied by Russian troops. The work of fortifying the shore had scarcely made any progress during the last weeks. The prospects of preserving the moment of surprise were so great that the question arose whether, under such circumstances, It was worthwhile to make artillery preparations for an hour, as the order provided. It was only out of caution, to avoid unnecessary losses resulting from unexpected Russian action at the moment of forcing the river, that I ordered the artillery preparation to be carried out within the prescribed time. So on the fateful day of June 22, 1941, at 2 hours 10 min. In the morning I went to the command post of the group and went up to the observation tower south of Bogukala. I arrived there at 3:10 AA when it was dark. 15 a.m. At 40 a.m., the first raid of our dive bombers. At 4:15 a.m. started crossing the Bug advanced parts of the 17th and 18th Panzer Divisions. At 45 a.m., the first tanks of the 18th Panzer Division crossed the river. During the forcing we used vehicles already tested in preparation of the Plan C Levo. Tactical and technical data of these vehicles allowed them to have overcome water lines up to 4 meters deep. At 6 o'clock, 50 mine. At Kolodno I crossed the Bug by assault boat. My task force with 2 radios on armoured vehicles, several cross-country vehicles and motorcycles crossed until 8h30 min. Moving in the footsteps of the tanks of the 18th Panzer Division, I reached the bridge over the Lesna River, the mastery of which was important for the further advance of the 47th Panzer Corps. But there, except for the Russian post, I met no one. At my approach the Russians began to scatter in different directions. 2 of my commissioned officers, contrary to my instructions, rushed to pursue them, but unfortunately were killed in the process. At 10 o'clock. 25 mine. The advance tank company reached the River Lesna and crossed the Wash. It was followed by the division commander, General Nearing. Throughout the first half of the day I accompanied the 18th Panzer Division. At 16 HERs, 30 mine. I headed for the bridge, the road over which led to Kolodno, and from there at 18 HRS, 30 min. I went to my command post. The suddenness of the attack on the enemy was achieved on the entire front of the tank group. West of Brest-Litovsk, the 24th Tank Corps captured all the bridges over the Bug River, which turned out to be in full working order. Northwest of the fortress in various places, the bridge flooding was in full swing. However, the enemy soon recovered from the initial confusion and began to offer stubborn resistance. Especially fiercely defended the garrison of the important fortress of Brest, which held for several days, blocking the railroad track and highways leading across the western Bug to Mukavik. In the evening, the tank group fought for Malorita, Kobrin, Brest-Litovsk, and Pruzhny. Near Pruzhny, the 18th Tank Division engaged in its first battles with enemy tanks. On June 23 at 40 TM, I left my command post and went to the 12th Army Corps, where General Schroth reported to me on the progress of the fighting for Brest-Litovsk. From this corps, I went to the 47th Tank Corps, to the village of Bildiki, 23 kilometers northeast of Brest-Litovsk. There I had a word with General Lemelson and established a telephone link with my command post to familiarize myself with the general situation. I then proceeded to the 17th Armoured Division, where I arrived at 8 o'clock. The Infantry Brigade Commander General Ritter V. von Weber reported to me on his actions at 8 hours, 30 min. I met the commander of the 18th Panzer Division, General Niehering, then again General Lemelson. Then I went to Pruzhny, where the command post of the tank group had been moved. The task force of my headquarters arrived in Pruzhny at 19 o'clock. On that day, the 24th Tank Corps was advancing with battles along the road Kobrin, Berezina-Kartuzskaya to Slutsk. The command post of the corps moved to Berezina-Kartuzskaya. I had the impression that the 47th Tank Corps was going to have serious battles with the Russians moving from Bialystok in the direction to the southeast, and therefore I decided to stay in the 47th Tank Corps for one more day. On June 24, at 8 o'clock, 25 min. I left my command post and drove towards Slonim. The 17th Tank Division had already entered this town. But on the road from Rusana to Slonim, I came across Russian infantry holding under fire the highway along which the offensive was to take place. A battery of the 17th Panzer Division and the motorized riflemen who had dismounted were engaged in a sluggish fight on the highway. I had to intervene, and with machine gun fire from the commander's tank, forced the enemy to abandon their positions. Now I could continue the trip. At 11 RS, 30 men, I arrived at the command post of the 17th Panzer Division, located on the western outskirts of Slonim, where, in addition to the division commander, General von Arnim, I met the corps commander, General Lemelson. While discussing the situation, we heard heavy artillery and machine gun fire in our rear. A burning truck prevented us from observing the highway coming from Bialystok. The situation was unclear until 2 Russian tanks appeared out of the smoke, firing heavily with guns and machine guns. They tried to make their way to Slonim, pursued by RTIV tanks, which were also firing heavily. The Russian tanks discovered us. Several shells burst a few steps away from where we were. We lost the ability to see and hear, being experienced soldiers. We immediately threw ourselves to the ground, and only poor Lieutenant Colonel Feller, unused to war, who had been sent to us by the commander of the reserve army, did not do it quickly enough and received a very unpleasant wound. Lieutenant Colonel Dalmazerb, commander of the anti-tank division, was badly wounded and died a few days later. These Russian tanks managed to destroy in the city. I then inspected the forward positions in Slonim and drove a TIV tank across the neutral strip to the 18th Tank Division. At 15 HRs, I was again in Slonim, after the 18th Tank Division had been tasked to advance towards Baranovichi and the 29th Motorized Division to accelerate the advance towards Slonim. I then drove back to the group's command post and suddenly came upon Russian infantry that had been moved to Slonim on trucks. The soldiers were just about to get off the vehicles. The driver sitting next to me received the order full throttle, and we flew past the astonished Russians. Stunned by this unexpected encounter, they did not even have time to open fire. The Russians must have recognized me, for their press then reported my death. So I was asked to correct their mistake through German radio. At 20 HRs. 15 mine, I am back at my headquarters. There I learned of heavy fighting on our right flank, where since June 23 at Maloritz the 53rd Army Corps had been successfully repulsing Russian attacks. Parts of the 12th Army Corps, located between the 24th and 47th Panzer Corps, began to establish a connection, although not yet strong enough. The left flank of the tank group was seriously threatened by the increasing pressure of the Russians retreating from Bialystok. We had to provide this flank, quickly pulling up the 29th Motorized Division and the 47th Tank Corps. Fortunately, we did not know how nervous Hitler was on this day, fearing that large Russian forces could disrupt at some point our covering maneuver. Hitler wanted to suspend the advance of the tank group and direct it immediately against the enemy forces in the area of Bialystok. This time the main command was still strong enough to insist on the earlier decision and complete the enveloping offensive on Minsk. Vilna and Kovno were taken. The Finns captured the Åland Islands. The nickel-rich Petsamo area was occupied by the German 1st Mountain Corps. On June 25 in the morning, I visited the hospital, where there were wounded men who had suffered the day before during the bombardment of our command post, during which I was on another section of the front at 9 o'clock. 40 men. I went to the 12th Army Corps at Lenovo. After familiarizing myself with the situation on the Corps section, I went to the 24th Tank Corps at Zariche. After a conversation with General Baron von Geyer, I visited the 4th Tank Division and at 16:30 mine. Again returned to the command post of the group. On this day, new enemy forces, including tanks, were moving from the area of Bialystok to Slonim. The 29th Motorized Division arrived at the front and was tasked to cover Slonim from the Russians. This allowed to use the main forces of the 17th and 18th Panzer Divisions to strike at Minsk. The 18th Panzer Division was already advancing on Baranovichi. On the morning of June 26, I went to the front of the 47th Tank Corps to follow its advance on Baranovichi and Stolbcy. The 24th Tank Corps was tasked to support the offensive of its neighbour from the north. At 7 Arias, 30 men. I arrived at the 17th Panzer Division and ordered it to move immediately to Stolbcy. At 9 o'clock, I was already at the command post of the 18th Panzer Division, where, in addition to the division commander, I also found the corps commander. The command post was located on the road Slonim, Baranovichi near Lesna, at a distance of 5 km from the advanced units of the division. From here by radio IADA, again contacted the 24th Tank Corps to ensure its support in the offensive on Baranovichi. This support was carried out by parts of the 4th Armoured Division, of which one battle group from 6 o'clock, already moving in a northerly direction. At 12 HS, 30 mine, 24th Tank Corps reported the capture of Slutsk. This was a great success of the command and troops of the corps. I sent a radiogram to the corps commander thanking him for the success and went to the forward units of the 18th Panzer Division, which were in the Tartak area. At the beginning of the afternoon, I received a message that Gotha was 30 kilometers north of Minsk, at 14H, 30 Min. From the headquarters of the army group, received an order that obliged me to advance with the main forces on Minsk and the 24th Tank Corps on Bobruisk. I was able to report that the 24th Tank Corps was already operating in the direction of Bobruisk, and the 47th Tank Corps was conducting an attack on Minsk through Baranovichi. I then ordered the task force of my headquarters to move to Tartak, where it arrived at 23:30. In the afternoon, a message was received from the 17th Panzer Division that it was advancing to Stolpsy on a road suitable for tank movement. It reached its goal in the evening. On this day, the division commander, General von Arnim, was wounded in action, and therefore General Ritter von Weber was to take command of the division. The tank group was again subordinated to the 4th Army and was ordered to cut off the enemy's escape routes from Bialystok along the line Zadvory, Golinka, Zelva, Zelvianka River. On this day, the 46th Tank Corps moved with its advanced units to the area of Tartak and became a link between the 24th and 47th Tank Corps. All the forces of the 24th Tank Corps could now be used to fulfill its main task, a blow to Bobruisk. The 8th Panzer Division of Army Group North managed to seize Divinsk and capture the bridges over the Zap, Divina River in this area. On June 27, the 17th, Tank Division came to the southern outskirts of Minsk, establishing communication with the 3rd Tank Group, which still on June 26 broke into the badly destroyed city. The Russian forces in the area of Bialystok and vainly tried to avoid complete encirclement were surrounded. Only some small units managed to escape to the east before the ring of encirclement closed. The first major success was looming. To continue operations, in my opinion, in the first place it was necessary to carry out the encirclement of the Russians in the area of Bialystok minimum forces of the tank group, using for this purpose mainly field armies. At the same time, mobile motorized formations should have reached the first operational goal of the campaign, the area of Smolensk, Yelnya, Roslavl. In all my actions in the following days, I was guided by this task. My orders corresponded to the basic plan of the operation, to steadily pursue this plan despite changes in the situation. That, it seemed to me, is crucial to the successful completion of the entire campaign. It was also clear to me that there was also a certain risk involved. These thoughts prompted me to go to the 47th Tank Corps again on June 28, in order to be close to the connection, which was most threatened by the danger of enemy attack, and if necessary to come to his aid in time. I met the corps commander in Svoyatichi, familiarized myself with the situation at the sites of his divisions, and by radiogram ordered my staff to accelerate the march of the 29th Motorized Division in the northern direction and to conduct an aerial reconnaissance of the roads Novogrudok, Minsk and Novogrudok, Baranovichi turrets. I then found the 18th Armoured Division, which, moving in one column, met some difficulties, but overcame them without any further consequences. Meanwhile, my Chief of Staff, Liebenstein, ordered to create a barrier of divisions from different corps to avoid a breakthrough of the enemy west of Kaidano, Piaseksna, Gorodische, Polonka. I approved this order. On this day, the 24th Tank Corps came close to Bobruisk. The command post of the corps from the 25th was in Filipovichi. The command post of the tank group on June 28 was transferred to Nesvizh, to the castle of Prince Radziwill, where the headquarters of a large Russian compound had been before. Of the old things I found on the upper floor of the castle only a photograph of some hunting party, which was attended by Kaiser Wilhelm I as a guest. On this day the fighting developed as follows. The 3rd Panzer Division reached Bobruisk, the 4th Panzer Division reached Slutsk, the 10th Motorized Division reached Sinyavka, the 1st Cavalry Division reached the area east of Drogishin. The 17th Panzer Division reached Kaidano, the 18th Panzer Division reached Nesvizh, the 29th Motorized Division reached the area of Zelvianka. Parts of the 10th Panzer Division occupied the Zelvianka area. The main forces of this division took Sinyavka. The SS Reich Division reached Berezina, the Infantry Regiment Great Germany went to the area northeast of Prigeny. The 7th and 20th Panzer Divisions of Gotha's group stood near Minsk. On the stretched right flank, the fighting of the 53rd Army Corps near Malorita ended in victory. The threat to this flank was thus eliminated. On June 29, Fighting continued along the entire front of the tank group. They reached a special tension on the Zelvianka section. The commander of the Fourth Army became alarmed and began to interfere in the actions of the group. His orders were a great hindrance to me. Some of them I did not even know about. Army Group North occupied Jakobstadt, Livengov and the southern part of the city of Riga, as well as the railroad bridges across the western Divina. June 30. I flew by plane to the 3rd Tank Group to coordinate with Gotha issues of further interaction. Lieutenant Colonel von Barzevich himself drove the bomber over Nalibukskaya Pushta, a large forest area from which the Fourth Army was constantly waiting for a Russian breakthrough. I had the impression that the enemy has here completely insignificant forces, and that in this direction there is no danger. With Goth, I agreed on the interaction of my 18th Panzer Division with his right flank in the attack on Borisov and in the creation of pre-bridge fortification on the Berezina River in this area. On the same day came the order of the General Command requiring the exit to the Dnieper. The General Command pointed out to the Army Group the crucial importance of continuing operations in the direction of Smolensk and expressed the desire to capture as soon as possible the crossings across the Dnieper at Rogachev, Mogilev and Orsha, as well as the crossings across the western Divina at Vitebsk and Polotsk. The next day, July 1, I flew to the 24th Tank Corps for our only means of communication. Radio still did not provide sufficient communication for a long time. Dyer's information about the enemy favoured our further plans. The enemy had mainly compounds made up of soldiers and equipped with equipment from various parts. The movement of transport was insignificant. The day before over Bobruisk was an air battle, which ended in defeat for the Russians. However, the enemy, as always, provided stubborn resistance. His troops acted skillfully, especially, it should be noted, good camouflage, but the management of the battle was not yet centralized. The corps managed to occupy the bridges across the Berezina at Svizlok. At 9 o'clock, 30 men, from the pre-bridge fortification on the Berezina River, east of Bobruisk, on Mogilev came reinforced reconnaissance battalion. Behind him to the east moved the main forces of the 3rd Panzer Division. General Baron von Geyer reserved the right to choose the direction of the main blow or on Rogachev or on Mogilev, depending on the situation. At 10 o'clock, 55 mine. The main forces of the 4th Panzer Division began the offensive from the boundary of the river Svizlok in the eastern direction. The situation with fuel was not alarming. The supply of ammunition, food and sanitation was in order. Losses, fortunately, were still insignificant. Only pontoon bridge fleets and construction units were lacking. Interaction with Colonel Melder's aviation was excellent. Only with the short-range bombers of General Fiebig we could not achieve the establishment of fast enough communication. The 1st Cavalry Division proved its fighting ability. On this day, aerial reconnaissance established that the Russians in the area of Smolensk, Orsha, Mogilev accumulate fresh forces. It was necessary to hurry with the exit to the Dnieper line and force this river without waiting for the arrival of infantry, which could lead to the loss of several weeks. Meanwhile, in the area of Bialystok were fierce fighting to destroy the encircled group of the enemy. This indicates that the Russian large forces were trying to break through to the east. The resistance of the Russians made such a strong impression on the command of the Fourth Army that it decided not to weaken the troops that carried out the encirclement. Therefore, Field Marshal von Kluge cancelled my order for the performance of the 17th Panzer Division to Borisov. Only one 18th Panzer Division reached Borisov and created on the Berezina pre-bridge fortification, from the retention of which largely depended on the continuation of the offensive of the 47th Panzer Corps in the direction of the Dnieper. In spite of all my doubts, I still sent out to the units the order of the command of the Fourth Army. On July 2, being in Missa in the 5th Machine Gun Battalion, which provided the flanks of the 17th Tank Division and the 29th Motorized Division, I personally found out the situation on the front around the encircled enemy group. I listened to the opinions of officers about the enemy in order to more correctly assess the situation. Then I went to General Lemelson and ordered him and the commander of the 29th Motorized Division, who was with him, to keep the encirclement ring closed. After that I headed for Kidano, where the 17th Panzer Division was located. General Ritter von Weber reported that he had successfully repulsed all enemy attempts to break out of the encirclement. From there I went to the new command post of the tank group, located at Sinilo. On arrival at the command post, I learned that the transfer of the order of the 17th Panzer Division there was some misunderstanding. It turned out that parts of the division did not receive an order to stay on the section of the front around the encircled group of the enemy and continued to advance on Borisov. I immediately ordered to report this fact to the command of the Fourth Army. It was impossible to change anything. At 8 o'clock, the next morning I was summoned to the headquarters of Field Marshal von Kluge in Minsk, where I was asked to give an explanation. After hearing my explanations, Field Marshal von Kluge said that he had already intended to put Gotha and me on trial because Gotha had had exactly the same misunderstanding, and the Field Marshal thought that he was dealing with a general's front. But I said that it is not so, and thus calmed him. After this conversation I went to the 47th Tank Corps in Smolevici, but there I did not find the corps headquarters and went further to Borisov to the 18th Tank Division. There I inspected the pre-bridge fortification on the Berezina and held a meeting with the commanders of this division. The division sent an advanced detachment in the direction of Tolochin. On the way back I met the corps commander in Smolevici and agreed with him on the actions of the 18th and 17th Panzer Divisions. During this meeting the radio operators of my commander's tank received a message about Russian tanks and airplanes attacking the crossing on the Berezina near Borisov. This was reported to the 47th Tank Corps. The attacks were repulsed with heavy losses for the Russians. The 18th Panzer Division got a fairly complete idea of the strength of the Russians, for they first used their T-34 tanks, against which our guns at that time were too weak. I too, the units of the tank group were per 1st Cavalry Division, south of Slutsk, 3rd Armoured Division, in Bobruisk, I 4th Armoured Division, in Svizlok, 10th Motorized Division, east of Slutsk, 1st Division right, north of Balusevici on the Berezina, 10th Armoured Division, in Cherven, Infantry Regiment Great Germany, north of Baranovici, 18th Armoured Division, in Borisov, 17th Armoured Division, in Kaidano, 29th Motorized Division, in Stolbsi, 5th Machine Gun Battalion, southeast of Baranovici. July 3, Russian troops surrounded near Bialystok capitulated. Now I focused all my attention on the movement to the Dnieper. On July 4, I visited the 46th Tank Corps. I went from Sinailo through Smolevici, Cherven, Slobodka to the command post of the 10th Panzer Division, and from there to the SS Division Reich. On the way to this division I met the corps commander, to whom, when asked about the whereabouts of the Great Germany Infantry Regiment, I could only reply that this regiment was still at Baranovici in the 4th Army Reserve. I then proceeded to the SS Reich Division at St. Recchi. General Hauser informed me that his motorized battalion, after heavy fighting, had formed at Brodek, a pre-bridge fortification on the Berezina. According to him, the bridge over the Berezina near Yakshitsi had been blown up, and he could not get the vehicles across the river. The sappers were busy repairing the access roads through the swampy terrain. I went to the sappers and saw that they were working diligently. They promised to finish their work by the morning of July 5. On July 4, the 24th Tank Corps reached the Dnieper River near Rogachev, capturing several more crossings across the Berezina. Neither divisions of the tank group were Akamstelstikitsk. 3rd Armoured Division, in front of Rogachev, 4th Armoured Division, in Stary Baikov, DE 10th Motorized Division, in Bobrisk, 6th Division Reich, in Balusevici, 10th Armoured Division, in Berezino, Infantry Regiment Great Germany, east of Stolbsi, 18th Panzer Division, east of Nacha, parts of the 17th Panzer Division, in Borisov, the main forces of this division, in Minsk, 29th Motorized Division, in the area of Kaidano, Stolbsi, 5th Machine Gun Battalion, west of Stolbsi. On July 6, large Russian forces crossed the Dnieper near Zlobin and attacked the right flank of the 24th Tank Corps. The attack was repulsed by the 10th Motorized Division. Our air reconnaissance reported the movement of enemy echelons from the area of Oral, Bryansk, in the direction of Gomel. In the area of Orsha, a new headquarters of the Russian army was detected. On the Dnieper, it seemed that a defensive line was being prepared. This made it necessary to hurry. K7, the following points were reached. Headquarters of the tank group, Borisov, 1st Cavalry Division, Bobruisk, 10th Motorized Division, Shashlobin, 3rd Armoured Division, Rogachev, Novy Baikov, 4th Armoured Division, Stary Baikov, 10th Armoured Division, Belinichi, Setmeragino, Infantry Regiment Great Germany, Cherven, 18th Armoured Division, Tolukin 17th Armoured Division, Senno 29th Motorized Division, Borisov. The 17th Panzer Division at Senno fought fierce battles with a strong enemy, who put into battle an extremely large number of tanks. The 18th Panzer Division was also fighting hard. Since the 24th Tank Corps had already reached the Dnieper, it was necessary to make a decision on further continuation of the operation. From my superiors, I did not receive any new instructions, so I had to assume that the old directive, according to which the 2nd Tank Group should go to the area of Smolensk, Yelnya, Roslavel, remains in full force. I personally did not find any reason to change this directive. At that time, I did not know that Hitler's views diverged from the point of view of the General Command of the Land Forces. About this fact and all its consequences I learned much later. Disagreements in the conduct of operations will become clear only if you look at what was going on behind the scenes of the German High Command in those days. Hitler lost sight of the fact that he himself personally ordered a rapid offensive with the operational goal of capturing Smolensk. In the last days of fighting, he saw only the encircled grouping in the area of Bialystok. Field Marshal von Brauchitsch did not dare to inform army groups enter his very different point of view because he knew Hitler's opinion. Field Marshal von Bock, by his own admission, wanted to transfer the 2nd and 3rd Panzer groups under the overall command of Field Marshal von Kluge to get rid of the direct responsibility for their management. Field Marshal von Kluge wanted, in accordance with the official opinion of Hitler, to consolidate on the front around Bialystok and wait until the capitulation of the Russians, refusing to further advance eastward. Gotha and I did not agree with this opinion. We were anxious to drive our tank forces eastward, as indicated in the original, still valid directive, and to achieve our first operational objectives. We wanted to shackle the enemy forces at Bialystok with a minimum number of tank forces and leave the liquidation of the encircled group to the field armies that followed our tank groups. The High Command secretly hoped that the commanders of tank groups without orders, and even contrary to orders, would strive to achieve the first operational objectives of the offensive. At the same time, it did not dare to give instructions to the commanders of army groups and army commanders to encourage them to make the desired decision. And so it turned out that the 2nd Panzer Group gave the order to contain the encircled grouping of Bialystok with minimal forces and all other available units to pursue the enemy retreating through the Berezina and Dnieper rivers. Field Marshal von Kluge gave a counter-order to all units involved in the encirclement of the enemy grouping to consolidate in their positions around Bialystok and wait for the order to continue the offensive in the eastern direction. Part of the troops received this order untimely and continued to advance to the Berezina. Fortunately, the whole operation as a whole did not suffer from this, but unpleasant relations were created between the commanders. Disputes began. I had to make a decision. Either to continue the rapid advance, to force their tank forces Dnieper and achieve their first operational objectives of the offensive in the time provided by the original plan of the campaign, or, given the measures taken by the Russians to organize the defense at this waterline, suspend the advance and do not start the battle until the approach of the field armies. For the immediate offensive spoke weakness at this point of the Russian defense, which was still being created. The Russians occupied strong pre-bridge fortifications at Rogachev, Mogilev and Orsha. Therefore, we failed to take Rogachev and Mogilev. True, we had information about the approach to the enemy reinforcements. A large group of Russian troops was noted in the area of Gomel, another, smaller, north of Orsha, in the area of Senno. But our infantry could approach not earlier than in 2 weeks. During this time, the Russians could greatly strengthen their defences. In addition, it was doubtful whether the infantry would be able to overturn the well-organized defences on the river section and again continue maneuver warfare. Even more doubtful was the achievement of our first operational objectives and the end of the campaign in the fall of 1941. I was fully aware of the difficulty of the decision. I considered the danger of a strong counterattack of the enemy on the open flanks that my 3 tank corps would have after forcing the Dnieper. In spite of this, I was so imbued with the importance of the task before me and faith in its solvability, and at the same time so convinced of the overwhelming power and offensive strength of my troops that I immediately gave the order to force the Dnieper and continue the advance on Smolensk. I gave the order to stop fighting at both sites, both at Zalubin and Senno, and to organize there only observation of the enemy. The Dnieper forcing areas were limited by the pre-bridge fortifications occupied by large Russian forces. By agreement with General Baron von Geyer, the 24th Tank Corps was assigned Stary Bykov as the point of forcing, and the day of the beginning of operations was July 10. On July 11, the 46th Tank Corps was to force the Dnieper at Shklov and the 47th Tank Corps at Kopis between the cities of Mogilev and Orsha. All troop movements and their exit to the initial position were carefully camouflaged. Marches were made only at night. Air cover of the initial position area was carried out by fighters of brave Colonel Melder, who deployed forward airfields directly behind the first echelon. Where his fighters appeared, the sky immediately became clear. On July 7, I visited the 47th Tank Corps to verbally explain the plans for forcing the Dnieper. On the way to the corps, I inspected a trophy Russian armoured train. Then I went to the Corps headquarters, stationed at Nucha, and from there to Tolochin, to the 18th Armoured Division, which was fighting Russian tanks. General Neering was pointed out the importance of the capture of the Kokanovo area, west of Orsha, and the elimination of the Russian pre-bridge fortifications in this area for the success of the upcoming operations. To the troops, who again made an extremely good impression on me, I expressed my special thanks. On July 8, I visited the 46th Panzer Corps. The SS Reich Division, which was part of it, was still fighting on the west bank of the Dnieper. July 9 was marked by particularly heated arguments over the conduct of the upcoming operations. Early in the morning, Field Marshal von Kluge appeared at my command post and asked to report to him the situation and my intentions. He was completely disagree with the decision to immediately force the Dnieper and demanded the immediate termination of this operation until the infantry arrives. I was deeply indignant and stubbornly defended my actions. Finally, having stated to him the arguments I have already mentioned, I stated that the preparations had gone too far, and now it was simply impossible to suspend them, that the parts of the 24th and 46th Tank Corps were mostly already concentrated at the initial position for the offensive, and I could keep them there only for a very short time. Otherwise they would be detected and attacked by the enemy's aviation. I further stated that I deeply believe in the success of the offensive and, on a larger scale, I expect this operation to end the Russian campaign as early as this year. My purposeful explanations apparently moved Field Marshal von Kluge. Although reluctant, he still agreed with my plan, saying, "The success of your operations always hangs in the balance." After this stormy conversation, I went to the 47th Tank Corps, which, being in a difficult situation, needed special support. At 12 o'clock, 15 min. I was in Krupke at the command post of General Lemelson. He expressed doubt that the 18th Panzer Division in General Strich's battle group, formed from tank fighters and scouts, would be able to seize the Kohanovo area because the troops were too tired from continuous fighting. I insisted on my order and ordered that the 18th Armoured Division, after accomplishing its task, as well as the 17th Armoured Division, after defeating the enemy at Seno, turn southeast to the From the Corps headquarters I went to the front. On the way I met General Streich and gave him the necessary instructions. Then I met Neering, who, contrary to the opinion of his Corps superiors, stated that the occupation of the specified area of the initial position was not difficult. Then I spoke with the commander of the 29th Motorized Division, who also stated that he could accomplish his task of reaching Kopis without much difficulty. The divisions were instructed this night to go to the Dnieper and occupy the specified areas of the initial positions. On this day, the 17th Panzer Division still fought fierce battles with enemy tanks, which brought it a major success. The division's troops destroyed 100 Russian tanks. By the evening of July 9, the tank group was located, Group Command Post. Borisov, as a cavalry division, provided flanks southeast of Bobruisk, 3rd Armoured Division, in the area of Zlobin, Rogachev, Novi Bykov with front to the north, 4th Armoured Division, Stary Bykov, 10th Motorized Division, Stary Bykov at the crossing point, 10th Armoured Division, south of Shklov, 6th Division Rish. At Pavlov, several units from this division south of Mogilev provided the right flank of the Corps, Infantry Regiment Great German at Belinichi, 18th Armoured Division, south of Tolochin, 17th Armoured Division. At Zamoske, 29th Motor Division southwest of Tolochin was concentrating for the offensive at Kopis. The infantry that followed us came in weak forward units on the line Bobruisk, Slutsk, Borisov, and the main forces. On the line Slutsk, Minsk, Gotha captured Vitebsk, Gepna, the city of Pskov. On July 10 and 11, with minor losses, a systematic forcing of the Dnieper was carried out. On July 10, in the middle of the day, the 24th Tank Corps reported that the corps had succeeded in forcing the Dnieper at Stary Bykov. In the afternoon, I went once again to the 47th Tank Corps to make sure of the combat capability of the troops and to inspect the area of the initial position. General Streit had withdrawn his troops to the line of his combat escort on the site of the Russian pre-bridge fortification west of Orsha. Northwest of Orsha, another group of combat guard under the command of Colonel Usinger was posted. The reconnaissance battalion of the 29th Motorized Division established contact with the SS Reich Division on the right. The 18th Panzer Division was in the area of its initial position, the 17th Panzer Division by 10 o'clock. Its advanced units reached the highway at Kohanovo. Parts of this division were already fighting on the west bank of the Dnieper southwest of Orsha. The 29th Motorized Division reached the area of its initial positions. I once again explained to the division commander that a quick exit to Smolensk after the successful forcing of the river is extremely important. So, at the front of the 47th Tank Corps, also managed to fulfill the difficult task of concentrating troops and occupying the initial position. I confidently went towards the events of the coming day. For the offensive after the forcing of the Dnieper were set the following tasks. 24th Tank Corps advances along the highway Propoysk, Eurozlary. The corps itself provides its right flank from possible enemy attacks from the side of Zhlobin, Rogachev, and its left flank from the side of Mogilev. The 46th Panzer Corps advances through Gorky, Pochinok to Yelnya, providing its right flank from Mogilev. The 47th Panzer Corps advances to Smolensk and additionally provides its left flank from the Dnieper, Patimos and Smolensk. In addition, the enemy at Orsha to the west and northwest of the Dnieper was monitored by the cover groups Streit and Usinger. In the evening of July 10, my headquarters visited the Italian military attaché General Maras, with whom I met back in Berlin. He was accompanied by Captain First Rank Berkner. I invited them both to accompany me the next day at the crossing of the Dnieper at Kopiz. In addition to these visitors, the same evening I had Lieutenant Colonel von Belov, Hitler's adjutant for air forces, to familiarize himself with the situation on the front of the tank group. July 11, early sunny morning at 6 o'clock. 10 Min. Accompanied by both my guests, I left my command post, located in Tolochin, which back in 1812 served as headquarters for Napoleon I and headed for the Dnieper to Kopiz to witness the forcing of the river by the 47th Tank Corps. The trip through the columns of troops that were rushing towards the river was difficult due to the heavy dust. Men, weapons, and engines all suffered from this dust that had been in the air for weeks. Especially often it was necessary to clean the cylinders of the engines with sandpaper, which significantly reduced their power. At the command post of the 29th Motor Division, located near Kopiz, I met the corps commander and the division commander, who reported to me the situation. The 15th and 71st Regiments had already crossed the river and east of Kopiz came to the edge of the forest. We saw them advancing on the enemy force of about 2 divisions. The enemy maintained a weak artillery harassing fire. In addition, the terrain was mined. There was full opportunity to observe the advance of our infantry and the bridge. After the Italian attack lift, I ordered to be ferried by assault boat to the east bank of the river to learn the results of the fighting. My intention to go from Kopiz to the 46th Tank Corps I was not able to realize as the connection with Shklov had not yet been established by mobile means. Meanwhile, it turned out that the 17th Panzer Division to the south of Orsha encountered such a strong enemy that it was inexpedient to continue the offensive further on the eastern bank from a small, just-captured pre-bridge fortification. The regimental commander Colonel Licht, who was in the area, therefore made the right decision to abandon the pre-bridge fortification. The 17th Panzer Division had to be transferred through Kopiz to the rear of the 29th Motorized Division. On the way back to the command center of the group, I met Field Marshal von Kluge and reported to him about the development of the offensive. He confirmed the orders I had given, and I, for my part, asked to pull up the vanguards of infantry corps to the Dnieper in order to speed up the blocking of the strong pre-bridge fortification of the Russians. At my command post I met Hitler's chief adjutant, Colonel Schmunty, and had a conversation with him. After a short stay in Tolochin at 18 hours. 15 minutes. I went to the 46th Panzer Corps to Schnupf. The roads were bad. The bridges required immediate repair. I arrived at the corps at 21 hours, 30 heavy artillery fire, and repeated bombing raids of the enemy aircraft on the area of the bridge by the 10th Panzer Division made forcing the river much more difficult than on the front of the 47th Panzer Corps. The SS Reich Division also had the bridge damaged by enemy aircraft. Despite this, the division managed to force the river and send in the direction of Gorky Advanced Detachment. I pointed out to the corps the need to attack at night to use the element of surprise, and then went to the 10th Panzer Division to follow the advance party. My arrival came in very handy, as the units had not yet advanced. After a difficult trip on July 12 at 4 o'clock, 30 men, in the morning I was again in Lyon. On July 11, the divisions of the tank group, Reach, 1st Cavalry Division, Zlobin Oregachev, 4th Armored Division, and 10th Motorized Division, the area of Stary Bykov and north of the pre-bridge fortification, on the east bank of the Dnieper, 3rd Armored Division, the area south of Mogilev, covering the flank from the side of the Russian pre-bridge fortification, 10th Panzer Division and Infantry Regiment Great Germany, the area south of Shklov, 6th Division Reich, the pre-bridge fortification on the eastern bank of the eastern Dnieper near Shklov. 29th Motorized Division created a pre-bridge fortification east of Kopis. 18th Panzer Division reached the area west of Kopis. 17th Panzer Division, the area southwest of Orsha. The covering groups of Strach and Usinger provided the flank of the group west and northwest of Orsha from the side of the Russian pre-bridge fortification. The main infantry forces reached the line east of Slutsk and east of Minsk. Its vanguards reached the Berezina. Gotha was near Vitebsk. On July 12, the troops continued forcing the river. On this day I flew by airplane to the 24th Tank Corps. There I stayed 8 hours. After visiting the corps I received Schmunt. The Army High Command on this day still had no clear idea of whether the enemy could continue its stubborn resistance to the tank groups of Army Group Center, or it will begin to retreat. In any case, the High Command wanted both tank groups to try to break through the front, formed by the Russians west of Smolensk, and defeat the enemy forces there. In addition, thought and whether not to turn parts of the 3rd Panzer Group to the north to cover maneuver to destroy the enemy forces facing the right flank. 16th Army. July 13, I moved my command post on the east bank of the Dnieper in Zakodio. On this day I visited the 17th Panzer Division, which was on the Dnieper. This valiant division since the beginning of the offensive destroyed 502 enemy tanks. Then I was present at the crossing of parts of the SS Division Reich and talked with Generals Gausser and von Fittinghoff. His division needed to accelerate the advance and organize reconnaissance in the direction of Monastechina, because, according to air reconnaissance southwest of Gorka, Russian units were trying to make their way to the Dnieper. Under the skillful leadership of its commander, the 29th Motorized Division that day advanced 18 kilometers from Smolensk. Our new command post, to which I returned at 5 p.m., was very favorably located and was close to the front line. Heavy fire could be heard from the south, and it could be concluded that the Great Germania Infantry Regiment was fighting hard. This regiment had the task of covering our flank against enemy attacks from the direction of Mogilev. And for night there was a cry for help. The Infantry Regiment Great Germany shot all the ammunition. The regiment, not yet accustomed to fighting in Russia, demanded additional ammunition, but it received none. The nervous firing was stopped. Calm ensued. On this day, the general command of the army suddenly had the idea to turn the 2nd Tank Group to the south or southeast. The basis for this decision was the successful development of the course of hostilities on the front of Army Group South, which came to the Dniester. At the same time, on the same day, the general command of the army was engaged in the African campaign of Rommel, as well as the development of plans for operations through Libya, Turkey and Syria in the direction of the Suez Canal. More detailed development of an operation from the Caucasus toward the Persian Gulf was begun. On July 14, I ordered the 46th Corps, together with the SS Division Reich, to advance to Gorky, and then myself went also in this direction. The 10th Panzer Division reached the settlements of Gorky and Mstislavl, having suffered heavy losses in heavy fighting, especially in artillery. The 29th Motor Division successfully advanced to Smolensk. The 18th Panzer Division forced the Dnieper and now provided the left flank of the 29th Motor Division in the area. north and northeast of Krasny. The 24th Panzer Corps extended the pre-bridge fortification in the direction of Volkovichi, pulling up the 1st Cavalry Division at Stary Bykov D. On this day, the General Command of the Army was developing preliminary plans for the further distribution of forces and composition of the groups that were to remain in the east as occupation troops. It was based on the position that in important industrial areas and railroad hubs should be placed such groups of troops which would be able, while performing occupation tasks, to conduct offensive operations by mobile types in remote areas where there are no our troops, in order to destroy the formed pockets of resistance. In this regard, the composition of the groupings of German ground forces in Europe after the completion of the Barbarossa plan was reviewed, as well as studied plans for reorganization and all kinds of reduction of the army. All these activities were carried out without any consideration of the harsh reality. First of all, it was necessary to bring to a successful conclusion of the Barbarossa plan, concentrating all efforts on it. On the morning of July 15, Field Marshal von Kluge arrived at my command post. After a conversation with him, I went to the 46th Tank Corps in Gorky, and from there to the 47th Tank Corps. In Zerevichi, 29th Motorized Division captured the southern part of Smolensk. The 18th Panzer Division reached the Dnieper north of Krasny. The Russians withdrew in 4 or 5 parallel columns along the highway Orsha. Smolensk, the 17th Panzer Division, captured the eastern and southern quarters of the city of Orsha on the east bank of the Dnieper. At 5 p.m., I was with General Neering, commander of the 18th Panzer Division, which had been fighting hard at Gosino. He reported to me about the considerable losses suffered by his rear at Dobrin, where the enemy was trying to break the encirclement ring in the eastern direction. At 17 hours, 40 minutes, I headed further towards Smolensk. On the way, my task force was raided from the air. There were no losses. At 19 hours, 15 min, near Smolensk, I had a conversation with the Chief of Staff of the 29th Motorized Division, the diligent Major Franz, who reported to me that the division was successfully advancing to Smolensk without heavy losses. Already the need to get reinforcements in personnel and material was making itself felt. At 23 hours, I arrived at the command post of the group, relocated during my absence in Gorky. On July 16, the 29th Motorized Division captured Smolensk. Thus, it was the first to reach the operational goal set before it. It was an outstanding success. The personnel of the division, starting from its commander, General von Boltenstern, and up to the last gunner, fulfilled their duty. All showed themselves brave soldiers. July 16, the compounds of the tank group, 1st Cavalry Division, southeast of Stary Bykov B, 4th Panzer Division. In the area between Chauzy and Molyatichi, 10th Motorized Infantry Division. South of Mogilev, 10th Panzer Division. In the area between Hislavichi and Pochinok, SS Division Reich. Behind the 10th Panzer Division Infantry Regiment, Great Germany. North of Mogilev, 29th Motorized Infantry Division. In Smolensk, 18th Panzer Division. In the area of Krasny Gusino, 17th Panzer Division. Near Lyady, Dubrovno. Forward detachments of infantry came to the Dnieper. They consisted of reconnaissance battalions and small motorized units of infantry divisions. Consequently, their combat strength was small. On July 13 began fierce counterattacks of the Russians. From the direction of Gomel on the right flank of the tank group attacked about 20 divisions. At the same time, the Russians made forays from their pre-bridge fortifications from Mogilev in the south and southeast directions and from Orsha in the southern direction. These operations were led by Marshal Timoshenko with the express purpose of pushing the German troops back over the Dnieper. On July 16, the regrouping of enemy troops in the direction of Gomel and Klincy was noticed, and east of Smolensk there was an increased movement of troops. Consequently, it was to be expected that the Russians would continue their attempts to stop our advance. Despite this difficult situation, I firmly adhered to the decision taken. As soon as possible to achieve the operational objectives specified to me, the Corps continued their offensive. On July 17, I flew to the 24th Tank Corps and visited the right flank of the 1st Cavalry Division, which persistently repelled Russian counterattacks on the Dnieper. To this day, the divisions went to the following areas: 1st Cavalry Division, south of Bykov, 10th Motorized Division, west of Cherikov, 4th Armoured Division, Krishev, 3rd Armoured Division, Lobkovichi, 10th Armoured Division, between Potinok and Yelnya, SS Reich Division, Mstislavy, Great Germany Infantry Regiment, Rikotka, 29th Motorized Division, Smolensk, 18th Armored Division, Katyn Gusino, 17th Armored Division, Lyady, Dubrovno. West and east of Mogilev, east of Orsha, north and south of Smolensk appeared large groups of the enemy. Goth came to the area north of Smolensk. The infantry advancing behind us reached the boundary of the Dnieper River. Army Group South managed to create a pre-bridge fortification on the Dniester. On this day I received together with Goth and Richthofen an oak leaves to the Knight's Cross. I was the 15th man in the land forces and 24th in the armed forces awarded this order. On July 18, I was in the 47th Tank Corps. 17th Armoured Division was moved from the flank, which it covered east of Orsha, to the area south of Smolensk, to repel the attacks of the Russians moving on the city from the south. In the fighting that took place here, the brave commander of this division, General Ritter von Weber, was mortally wounded. In the following days, the 46th Tank Corps, breaking the stubborn resistance of the enemy, defending on fortified positions, took possession of the city of Yelnya and its environs. On the right flank and in the rear of the corps, fighting still continued. July 20, the compounds of the tank group came out. 1st Cavalry Division, southeast of Baikov, 10th Motorized Division, west of Sherikov, 4th Armored Division, Sherikov, Krychev, 3rd Armored Division, Lobkovichi, 10th Armored Division, Yelnya, SS Reich Division, the Great Germany Infantry Regiment, west of Hislavichi, 17th Panzer Division, south of Smolensk, 29th Motorized Division, Smolensk, 16th Panzer Division, Gusino. The Russians continued to launch counterattacks on the 24th Tank Corps and on Smolensk. Near Yelnya again fighting broke out. The infantry advancing behind us crossed the Dnieper. Goth intended to encircle large enemy forces northeast of Smolensk. To do this, he needed the support of the 2nd Tank Group from the south, in the direction of Dorogobush. I had a great desire to help him, and I went on July 21 to the 46th Tank Corps to order the necessary regrouping. The southern and western parts of Smolensk were under enemy artillery fire, so I had to drive around the city through the fields. By mid-afternoon I arrived at one of the regiments of the 17th Panzer Division, which was providing the southeastern flank at Sloboda. In Kizevsk I found the command post of the 46th Tank Corps, where I familiarized myself with the situation and then inspected the positions of the infantry regiment Great Germany south of Voskovo Station. In front of the regiment was still weak enemy with artillery. At this time all the forces of the 46th Tank Corps were fighting hard with the enemy. Therefore, I decided to replace the Infantry Regiment Greater Germany 18th Panzer Division, which in the coming days was to finish the fighting at Gusino and thus provide the 46th Tank Corps the opportunity to support Gotha. I gave all the necessary orders by radio from the command post of the 46th Panzer Corps. The corps was to operate with all forces in the direction of Dorogobush. Short-range aviation was to support troops repulsing Russian counterattacks southeast of Yeln from the Spazdimensk area. On the way back I received several radiograms from my headquarters, containing an order from higher authorities for the immediate use of the SS Reich Division in the direction of Dorogobush. But at the moment nothing more than what had already been done in the 46th Tank Corps could be done. From the 47th Tank Corps, which I once again visited, also nothing more could be demanded. Everything depended on how quickly we could remove the 18th Panzer Division from the flank it had secured at Gusino, and thus free the forces needed for a further advance northward. And here again followed the personal intervention of Field Marshal von Kluge, who was concerned about the left flank of the tank group on the Dnieper. He delayed the 18th Panzer Division in a similar manner as it was at Bialystok, without notifying me of his order. As a consequence, there were not enough forces for the attack on Dorogobush. In the evening, under enemy artillery fire, I sneaked through Smolensk to the command post of the group in Koklovo, located southwest of the city. At the same time, the motorcyclist Gel Rigel, who was accompanying me, was thrown out of the car by a blast wave, but fortunately he was not wounded. The city of Smolensk suffered little as a result of the fighting. Having captured the old part of the city on the south bank of the Dnieper, the 29th Motorized Division, having the task of establishing communication with Goth, crossed the Dnieper River and took possession of the industrial district of the city located on the north bank of the river. Taking advantage of my visit to the positions in Smolensk, I decided to inspect the cathedral. It remained unharmed. On entering, the visitor was struck by the anti-religious museum placed in the central part and left half of the cathedral. At the gate stood a wax figure of a beggar asking for alms. In the inner part of the room, there were wax figures in full human size, showing in an exaggerated way how the bourgeoisie exploits and oppresses the proletariat. There was no beauty in this. The right half of the church was reserved for worship. The silver altar and candlesticks had apparently been tried to be hidden, but they had not managed to do so before we arrived in town. At any rate, all these extremely valuable things were lying in a heap in the centre of the cathedral. I ordered to find someone among the Russians who could be entrusted with the responsibility of preserving these valuables. They found a church watchman, an old man with a long white beard, to whom I conveyed through an interpreter that he should take charge of the valuables and put them away. The valuable gilded carved frames of the iconostasis were completely intact. What became of the cathedral afterwards, I do not know,